welcome Erin Okamoto for being here, and we're so thankful to have her. I did a good job of pronouncing her name. She drew a beautiful picture for me. But it's true. Well, every time you announce someone, a name is the trickiest part, so you want to make sure you get it right. But we're really lucky to have Erin here, especially that Erin has a local connection to the Wabash Valley. Her mother grew up in West Terre Haute from St. Mary's Village. That's where she was born and raised, which I think is lovely. And Erin has gone on to Purdue Northwest, where she's now teaching, and she got her master's there. And that's where she actually made this documentary, Without Due Process, about her family's experience with internment. And her story, I can't wait to be able to share with you, because I think it's just something that's really special. So I'm excited for you guys to be able to experience this film. This is a different way that we've done our films in the past. We usually with the Big Read do some kind of film, either the movie that's been made into a film, or something that shares similar themes. But this is such a breath of fresh air, being able to do a documentary, and especially from someone that has local ties. So thank you for coming, and I think that is a testament to how great that is that we have such a good crowd. So I will let Erin get up here and get started if you like. And in the end, we're going to do questions and answers, so please think about what you might want to ask Erin if there's any more details, and we'll kind of help that along. Okay, thank you.
Okay, hello, my name is Erin Okamoto Protsman. I am a full-time faculty member at Purdue Northwest. I'm really excited to be here. This is where my mom was born and raised. And I have family. My friend from high school showed up, and my mom's best friend's daughter is here. So I think that's wonderful. So thank you all for coming. So where to begin? So I was in grad school at Purdue, and I went out to lunch with two of my professors, and I had not met one of them. And so there was some exchanges of information, and one of the professors said her father was in the Japanese American internment camps during World War II, and her name was Professor Hurley, pounced on that, and she said, "You simply must interview your father." And the camps were something that they loomed large in our home when I grew up. We didn't really talk about it a lot. I just knew that it happened. I knew that it was wrong. I knew that it was a very debated topic, and that people really supported these camps, but then there were, these entire community of people were taken from their homes without due process and were made to live in horrendous conditions for the duration of World War II. So at first when I was little, I thought that when they were talking about the camps, it was like summer camp. And then when my friends were actually going to summer camp, I realized there were two different kinds of camps. Anyway, so I interviewed my father, and this was the first time he really opened up about his experiences in the camps. And then he came from a family of 10, which you'll see a picture of them. So 10 siblings, and I interviewed a majority of my aunts and uncles as well. So this is my family's experience with the internment. We can discuss after the fact, but anyway, it's called Without Due Process. My dad is the one who is involved with the classes, just so that you know. His name is George. So I'm just going to start this, and then I'll answer any questions you have. So do you guys have questions or comments? Yes.
What brought your family to Terre Haute or West Terre Haute?
Okay, so my mom was born and raised in West Terre Haute, so she's Caucasian. She met my dad after the war. She actually was in the USO here. She was in the 4-H club, and evidently, is that really quiet? Evidently, it was the wind.
Yeah.
She was in the 4-H club, and she won she won some contest in 4-H, and Her prize was a 3-day trip to Chicago. So as a teenager, she went to Chicago, fell in love with the city, came home, turned 18, worked a year, and then like hightailed it back to the city where she met my dad, who was, so right after, he was wounded in World War II. He was in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which is the most decorated unit for its size in all of military history. And actually in 2011, and then I'll answer your question, in 2011, the 442nd, the 100th Battalion, and the MIS won the Congressional Gold Medal from Congress. Anyway, so they moved to Florida, did not work out, so they relocated to Chicago, where my dad was at the 4th Presbyterian Church, which if you've been to Chicago on Michigan Avenue, it's the big giant church right across from the Water Tower place. They met there. It was the first Asian she has ever met. They started to date, which back in 1949 was quite a scandal, and then got married in 1950. So like my dad's family were not from here, they were from the Los Angeles area, but they met in church. So, other questions? Yes.
Did your dad ever speak Japanese at home?
Well, yes and no. So my grandma came from Hiroshima, and my grandfather came from Nagasaki. They immigrated here in the early 1900s and started having a family. My oldest uncle was, I think he was born in 1920. My dad was born in 1923. So I think my grandparents always encouraged everyone to assimilate. So they spoke English outside of the home, but my grandparents had to learn English as their second language. So my dad knew Japanese as a way to communicate with his parents until they learned English better. But once the war started, like Japanese was not spoken ever. That was like my aunts had Japanese names. My uncles had American names, and they changed all of my aunts' Japanese names to American names. So Aunt Taya became, well, actually she kept her name. She went back, but like my Aunt Fume was Aunt Dorothy from then on out. So they really discouraged the language. So, and actually none of my cousins or my siblings speak Japanese. I had to take Spanish. Would love to have learned the language, but it was so traumatizing, I think, to be considered the enemy when you were, I mean, my family, my aunts and uncles and my dad were born in Seattle, Washington. So no, we didn't speak or they didn't speak after that, but I think they knew it. For example, we would be watching like a Kurosawa film as I was growing up, and we're reading the subtitles, and my dad laughs. Like, what's so funny? Oh, I don't know, and like read the subtitles, but there's nothing funny on the subtitles, so I think that he denied him, just for survival purposes. So, yes.
I think the film is really engaging, and I wonder how much exposure it's gotten.
It didn't get, actually, I was just telling my friend and Tara that we're actually considering remaking, like, freshening it up a little bit, because starting grad student, this was as good as I could make it with the credit card that I had, and then once that maxed out, so it needs some love, I think, and it would be nice There's holes in it, like for example, you may notice that we kind of skipped over World War II. And I would have liked to have, and actually Senator Lugar from Indiana did he had a veterans project where he would send his staff people to interview about their experiences in the war. And I think Senator Donnelly took that over, so it still exists. But my dad submitted for an interview for World War II, and I would like to get a hold of that and put that in there somewhere, because they did this incredible thing, and I skipped over it. And I would like to put it in. So, yes?
Where did you get the sign that said jazz? I think I saw at least 3 of them, something about going home.
Yeah, so those are actually, like the posters are United States propaganda posters. They're in the National Archives. So if you actually just go to the National Archives and type in, or even Google search at this point, Japanese propaganda posters, there's dozens.
The reason I asked is because I was 6 years old when the Japanese bombed Pearl.
Oh, okay.
I can remember growing up and some of my white friends would call me a dirty Jap.
Yeah.
And I would go home. My mother was Japanese, born and raised in Hawaii. And she said, don't pay attention, they don't know what they're talking about. But I'd never seen those signs until I saw this.
They were everywhere. They were in grocery stores. People just their homes would say, Jap, keep on moving. And that's like the equivalent of the N-word. I mean, it is just as derogatory as you can be. But those were propaganda posters that were produced and mass distributed by the United States government.
So them was going all around, and so people just picked it up.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
Some of the children.
There's so much propaganda. I mean, the United States government did this incredible job about really binding the American community together, for the war effort, which was great, but it came at a price. So if you even go on Google or YouTube and you type in Looney Tunes Tokyo Jokyo, there is the most racist, horrible, anti-Japanese Looney Tunes, where how at the very beginning they have the cute little with Porky Pig, and then they have these propaganda movies that they showed in the movie houses. Walt Disney, same thing. So that's why, it's because there was just this incredible communication effort to bind the community together, but it was at the expense of, and it was easy because you could pick out an Asian face, and it was easy to do an us and them to get everybody involved in the war effort. Did you go to camp? You were in Hawaii, so you didn't go to camp. Okay.
But I find it very distasteful. Even when I came to Terre Haute, people would say to me, "Oh, you're Jap," and I would say, "Excuse me, I would like for you to say you're Japanese."
Yeah.
I could say I'm not a Jap.
Right.
I'm Japanese.
Yeah. So in Hawaii, they didn't go to the camp. I think it probably, and I'm glad.
Well, some of them went to camp. In fact, I think as an adult, when I realized there was a Honolulu internment camp practically in my backyard. But as a 6-year-old, I didn't pay attention to where they went, and I'm kind of like some of the others. They went to camp. It was almost like a Boy Scout camp or a summer camp. So yes, there was one in Hawaii.
So a lot of the MIS, the Military Intelligence servicemen who did the help with the interrogations and the interpreting came from Hawaii. So also a lot of the farmers and the businessmen. So did you all read the book? The book? Okay, so how the dad was removed. He was actually in a worse situation. They took a lot of the businessmen, and especially the importer-exporters, they swooshed them away to like a detention center, which was worse than the camps. So it was worse conditions, less freedom, even more so than the camps. So they had horrible experiences.
Hearing about the camps and the camp in Hawaii makes me wonder too how widespread the enforced incarceration was. Was it? I mean, because you hear mostly about the people on the West Coast.
Well, that was where the concentration of the Japanese community was in Washington, Oregon, and California. So they moved that community inland, but the camps were all over. So they were in Wyoming. I think there was one in Arkansas, Utah. I think in the book they were in Utah. My family was in Arizona. There's several.
I met a woman who grew up as a child who said that a couple miles before she grew up in New Jersey, there was an internment camp.
Really?
And I've never seen any record of this, but from her description, it sounded very incredible.
Wow.
I've heard a little bit about this in other research I've done, that a lot of those I think were those detention centers too. I don't know. That seems like what I've gathered is some of those were the detention centers where they weren't publicizing as much where they were, because that's what I've kind of heard about. There were some in the South too.
What's interesting, going back
kind of hard to
to
get
Terre Haute, my mom knew nothing about the camps. They literally took a community, and it outside of the West Coast, no one knew. It wasn't in the newspapers. I was actually doing a lot of research trying to find articles about the camps. It was this well-held secret. No one really knew. So
When did it start being taught in school?
the camps, I know it was in my history book. I think it got a whole paragraph. So I'm not sure. There's a lot of camp deniers too, like they would, like you know how you have the Holocaust deniers. No, that wouldn't happen. We would never do that. But it did, and it did. So
That question keeps coming up at every program that we do, is this taught in schools?
I would like it to be.
And it really, from what we've gathered, I mean, it really isn't. There's maybe a few sentences, or if that.
Yeah.
So people really don't know. Or if they
It's
do,
kind of a footnote at this point, and unfortunately, like, you know, everyone who were in the camps are like now in their, you know, their 70s, 80s, 90s, or no longer with us. Actually, it was kind of nice to like revisit my dad, because we lost him in 2013, and my uncle who liked to fish just passed away in October. And my aunt with the white hair, with the sweet voice, she's gone, and her husband is gone now. So I'm so glad that we did this program, because I want people to keep talking about it. Because I think if we don't talk about it, we make the mistakes that we've made in the past again.
What kind of thoughts do you have when you hear in current news about rounding up Muslims or people from Saudi? I mean, what kind of reaction?
Actually, so 9/11 happened, and like, I live in Northwest Indiana, so like Hammond, we're about 45 minutes away from Chicago, but there were like the next day hate crimes even in Northwest Indiana, and I actually wrote an editorial about Northwest in the Northwest Indiana Times, which is our big newspaper. They're saying we've learned nothing. So, and it was scary, because actually President Walker Bush, W. Bush, said, you know, stop. So he was at least, but like Rush Limbaugh from Talk Radio is like, round them up, throw them in, we'll worry about the costs later. And language like that scares me, like weaponized language scares me, because I grew up with this looming so large in my family that we have rights, but they can be taken away, so we want to protect them regardless of. So that to me was upsetting. Also upsetting is when anyone wants to not worry about due process, because they were never charged with a crime. They were, like, you know, if you ever get arrested, they have to charge you within a certain number of days, or they have to leave you, right? Or like they have to let you go. They were never charged with a crime. They were just rounded up based off of their, you know, their faces. So, yes.
A couple of years ago, I visited Manzanar. It's a very interesting place.
In
There's still
California.
a number of buildings there, and they had an elderly couple who had been there, and he talked a little bit. They have a nice film, and I asked him when it was over, I said, well, what was it like for you? And he said, well, we were farmers. He said, as a boy, I had lots of chores to do on the farm. But then we came to the camp, and I had no chores. And there were other boys, and there was a place to play baseball, and I had a wonderful time. He said, but my parents were very unhappy. And I remember that so clearly.
I wonder how old he was.
He was probably 8 or 9, I think, at the time.
So, yeah,
But
so
in
if anybody's
Manzanar-
been in the Arizona desert in July, it is extraordinarily hot, and I give my family credit for being ingenious enough to actually dig a basement, but then I think, you know what they had to, they literally dug in the ground to survive, just because of just the scorching. I cannot imagine. So,
I have a quick question. Yeah. So, how did you decide to create this film and for this to be your project? I know you grew up with this, of course, in your family, but I wonder how, because this was many years ago.
so
How did
this
you
was,
decide to do this?
this actually was a finished product on 9/11. So like in the morning, I ran to Purdue, I got my VHS tape, it was like official, and I was happy about it for like 45 minutes, and then 9/11 happened, I was like, oh my goodness. So I mean, just the irony of
That's
that
unreal.
time.
That's what you need to add into the next part of
Right,
the story.
so like, literally until about 9 o'clock, I was like, yes, this is like a year's worth of work, I'm graduating now, and it was like, oh my goodness. I'm sorry, what was the question? I completely.
Oh, okay. Just how did you know this was important and knew this was something to share?
Well, because I was having lunch with those two professors, and I would never, I mean, because, you know, in the Japanese culture, it's very humble. You don't talk about unpleasant things, and you know, like I said, we knew about it. Sometimes we would get snippets of information, but it wasn't like we were sitting down and saying, so Dad, what did you think? Because it was just, we don't speak it kind of, Harry Potter reference. And so my professor just pretty much insisted that I interview my dad. And just approaching my dad saying, okay, so Dad, my professor is making me ask you this, and if you don't want to, you don't have to, and if you want to say no, that's fine. So I was tap dancing around it, and I said, so would you mind answering some questions about your experience in camps, 4th grade? And I was just like waiting for him to say, no, we don't talk about it. And he's like, okay. But then he said, but you know what, I think it would be more valuable if you ask your aunts and uncles. Because I think he probably didn't want to be the first one to talk. And so Easter actually, would have been this week. I think I had like 5 days before Easter, I went to Easter and sat the grown-ups at the table and said, this is what I'm thinking about doing. If I do this, will you participate? And everyone's like, absolutely. And actually my uncle Paul was the one who talked about the snake. He said, you need to go to Los Angeles and get the rest of the family. And I did. So my camera crew and I had a camera crew. And I went to Los Angeles and we interviewed Chris Conine, who was the resident expert at the Japanese American National Museum, and just did a lot of interviewing.
Well, you did a tremendous job. I mean, I think that everyone was thinking that is I feel like this is the sentiment a lot of people feel as well. This is such a complete story. I feel like so much of what we're able to get, I mean, it mimics the book in a lot of ways too, like kind of bringing some clarity, but to be able to get their story so clearly and all these different aspects that we've heard maybe little bits about, I mean, this is such a clear view of what life was like, and some of the images you have and the drawings. It's just such a, I'm so thankful that you put this together.
Oh, thank you. So my dad was actually a cartoonist for Post and Chronicle. So when it said the Post and Chronicle, was my dad's art. And I actually got to dig in the University of Chicago's library, and they have the entire set of internment papers, which was amazing. And I would have loved to have spent weeks there instead of like the 5 hours that I was allowed to be in there just for research purposes. Was like incredible, which was great. Like, and I know my dad's style, so I was like going through the microfiche. I'm like, oh, Dad, there's a dad cartoon. What I thought was interesting too is my family's very artistic. Unfortunately, it skipped a generation. I cannot draw to save my life. But my Aunt Dorothy lent me a book about the camps, and I was flipping through it, and my other aunt's artwork was in it. I'm like, oh my goodness! So the cartoon where the person's blowing away, that was my aunt. But the other camp pictures, like with the no privacy in the toilets, those pictures, was actually done by a Caucasian woman who had married a Japanese American. The government wanted to put him in the camp and leave her behind. And she insisted that she go to the camp too, but she had more freedom because she was white. But she is the one who did those, the rest of the sketches, and the Japanese American National Museum lent them to me, which was nice. So, yes.
Well, I read the book, and other than the father who was in a different camp that you said was much worse, and from what I saw in the video, everything I heard, although it was a horrible situation, were they pretty much treated okay by the guards? I mean, it didn't sound like there was a lot of abuse or cruelty.
At least for my family, no, they never reported any abuse, and just the fact that they could be bribed with an apple and let like kids leave. When I was interviewing my uncle, and he said, yeah, we would like crawl under the fence. Like, what? Actually, I have an aunt who passed away many years before I did this. I actually interviewed her in the 8th grade for a history project, and I think there's a passage in the book about a Japanese American man in the camps who got killed. He was shot, and they thought because he was deaf, and that he might have been reaching up for a flower. That's actually a story that my aunt Shirley told me, was how scary the guards were, and that she saw a flower, and I want to say she was also in her mountain, Wyoming, and that she was reaching for the flower, and she heard like the ch-ch, and looked, and that there were guns trained on her, and she was little. I mean, she was probably not even 10 years old. But you know what? I mean, looking back, I'm not sure I probe my family on their treatment.
You said that in the culture they don't want to talk about anything unpleasant. I wondered if it was just kind of glossed over.
Maybe. I don't have any memory of me asking them
like
that.
The Holocaust, they were raped by the guards, and unspeakable cruelties, but you don't hear that about the Japanese.
Yeah, actually, I went into I'm glad that you mentioned the Holocaust. I used the term concentration camp, which makes people's eyebrows go up a little bit. And the reason why I wanted to explain that, the Americanized term is like either relocation camp or internment camp. So when I was working with the Japanese American National Museum, museum, they said they would cooperate with me if I used the term concentration camp. And I said, well, I'm a little uncomfortable doing that because I don't want to devalue what the Jewish population had to endure who were in concentration camps. And they said, no. They were in death camps. That all of these euphemisms that we use to take the power away from words. And he said, well, we need to start using the words that the worst. And it was a concentration camp because they took an entire population and put them in a concentrated area. But then the Jewish concentration camps were actually death camps because they were. So that's why I made that decision. But I sometimes get questioned on that. So when you said concentration camp, I thought, I will put that in there. So, anything else?
Can you tell a little bit about how the family after the war, what happened to all the kids?
Oh yeah. Okay. So if you've noticed, my family was very positive, very, very forgiving about the situation. And it's funny because the same professor the same professor that came with me to these interviews actually said, how could you be so calm about this? How are you not mad? And that's why they started talking about, come on, you suck it up. And anyway, so they took this as an opportunity because my grandpa was a farmer and a gardener, and my dad wanted to be an artist, but he knew that in his life he was going to be a farmer and a gardener. And so they all had opportunities because after the camps, they weren't allowed to go back to California right away. So all of their stuff that was in storage was basically stolen or like reallocated because they didn't get to come back. They were gone for years. So anyway, because they had to like relocate, the oldest son became an electrician. My dad was a commercial artist for advertising. Actually, the movie, like the drive-in movie, like Let's All Go to the Lobby, with the dancing hot dog that jumps into the mud. That's my dad's artwork. So if you want to see it, you can just, again, YouTube John Travolta sings I Embrace to that thing in the background, that dancing hot dog, that's my dad. The uncle that was the fisherman, he became an aeronautical engineer and actually had a hand in designing the Apache helicopter. And the little baby who was born in the camps that was in the little bucket, he's a Superior Court judge in Los Angeles, and actually he went to Vietnam and is the highest decorated Japanese American to serve in Vietnam, and was actually featured in the Ken Burns film of Vietnam that just came out a month or two ago. So I know. So they looked at, as long as it had to happen, they had a very positive outlook. Did they want it to happen? Absolutely not. Are they happy it happened? Absolutely not. But since it did, make lemonade out of lemons and never complain.
Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if we could have interviewed some of these 442 veterans. I had an uncle, and he would not, as a child, I don't remember him ever talking about being over there fighting Germany. He would talk about it. He just thought, tell us about it. It was very quiet. I guess maybe they had mixed feelings about what they were doing and why they were doing it, but they knew that they were American citizens and they were going to fight for our country.
Yeah, their motto was go for broke. Basically, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain by fighting, and they did. I mean, they just were incredible. And actually, at the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony. My dad was one of the youngest soldiers. He volunteered when he was 19 years old, and at the time he was 88. So there was just a lot of very old soldiers that came to get their respect, which was amazing. So anyway, anything else?
I would just like to thank you for creating this film and sharing it with us and coming and talking to us.
Well, thank you
For sharing your
me.
family with us.
Well, you know what, that, and I love them dearly. I think that what they endured, and just the fact that like half of my uncles are laughing through this whole thing, it's a defense mechanism. You know, you just have to be positive, and you know, I just think that they're quite awesome. So thank you for appreciating their story, because they did me such a favor, and I always present them, and then I want people to appreciate, you know, what they went through. And you too. So thank you for sharing your story too.
No, thank you. I mean, I feel like I just feel exactly like Margot.
Because it's, you know what, this was quite, I did this a few years ago, so it's nice to get it dusted off a little bit, and have a new set of people appreciate it. I appreciate it.
I feel like this information is really difficult to find. I feel like people weren't sharing their stories, and so I mentioned this to you earlier, but I think people like you and like Julie who are able to share their family stories. It's so important that we remember, because people didn't speak about it for so long, and I understand why they didn't. So it's so wonderful that new generations are being able to share this information and spread it more.
Yeah.
So really, thank you.
And actually,
it's
you
so
know,
important.
when you were talking about Julie's book, so much of what she said, my family alluded to, or at least explained it. So I'm thinking, well, this is kind of nice. So it wasn't an isolated incident as far as my family was concerned. This actually happened all over, like the unscrupulous lawyer who, you know, took this woman's rent. The land, I mean, what I think is incredible is all of that land by Disneyland was seized, and they were compensated at a very minimal level. Very minimal level. I mean, just the loss is incredible.
I think those are the kinds of things people don't, I mean, even, you're not getting that story in a history book regardless. You know, when you do have those few sentences, it's all those other things that go into it of, I mean, you're losing all of your property, you have nothing to come back to. I mean, and the images of camp are not what people imagine either. You know, I think a lot of the conversation was that it's camp.
Right.
Not that it's, I mean,
it was not that big of a deal. No one tortured you. You were fine.
Yeah.
A lot of times people too think that this helped. You know, we protected. You weren't safe outside, so it's kind of a justification, which, in my opinion, there is not. So,
Well, thank you, and thank you guys all for coming. Thank you very much.